There are places in this world where the silence is a living thing. Where the creak of a floorboard isn't just your imagination, and the feeling of being watched is a cold, hard certainty. Isolated cabins, nestled deep in the wilderness, promise solitude. But sometimes, that solitude is broken. What happens when you're miles from anyone, and you realize you're not alone? Tonight's stories are about those moments. These are 5 terrifying horror stories from isolated cabins. Mark just needed to get away. After a brutal breakup, he rented a small, one-room cabin on a remote lake in northern Maine. The drive up was beautiful, but as he pulled up to the property, a chill went through him that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The cabin was small, dark. It sat under the shadow of enormous pine trees, and the only sound was the lapping of the lake against the shore. His first night was uneventful. But on the second night, he was woken by a sound. Knock, knock, knock. It was slow, deliberate. Coming from the front door. His heart hammered in his chest. Who could be out here? He wasn't expecting anyone. The rental agent said the nearest neighbor was 10 miles away. He crept out of bed, his feet cold on the wooden floor. He didn't turn on any lights. He peered through the tiny peephole in the door. Nothing. Just an inky blackness. The knocking stopped. He wrote it off as a tree branch or an animal and went back to bed. The next night, it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, it was louder. More insistent. Again, he checked the peephole. Nothing. A deep, primal fear began to set in. He grabbed the fire poker from the hearth and held it tight, sitting on his bed until the sun came up. On the third night, he was ready. He left all the lights off and sat in a chair facing the door, the fire poker across his lap. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. Then, he heard it. Not from the door. This time, it came from the wall right next to his bed. Knock, knock, knock. It was on the inside of the cabin. He froze, his blood turning to ice. He slowly turned his head. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, he saw it. A long, pale arm was sliding out from a crack between the wooden wall panels. Its fingers, too long and jointed all wrong, were tapping gently on the interior wall of the cabin. It had been inside the walls the whole time. The knocking wasn't something trying to get in. It was just letting him know it was already there. Sarah and her 2 friends, Chloe and Ben, were thrilled for their weekend ski trip. The A-frame cabin they found was perfect, surrounded by a pristine blanket of snow in the Colorado Rockies. The first day was all laughter, hot chocolate, and cozying up by the stone fireplace. That first evening, Ben went out to the woodpile to get more logs. He came back in, a strange look on his face. "You guys messing with me?" he asked. Sarah and Chloe shook their heads. "I could have sworn I saw a face in the stack of firewood. Like a carved face." They laughed it off, telling him the thin mountain air was getting to him. But later, when Sarah went out for more wood, she saw it too. It was just for a second, in the flicker of her flashlight beam. One of the logs, a thick piece of gnarled oak, had what looked like a screaming face twisted into its bark. The eyes were hollow knots, the mouth a deep, ragged split. It was unsettling, but she brushed it off as a strange natural formation. That night, as the fire crackled, they all heard a faint, hissing whisper. It seemed to come from the fireplace. They fell silent, listening. The whisper grew louder, forming a single, rasping word, out. Terrified, Ben used the poker to pull the burning logs apart. There, in the center of the flames, was the gnarled oak log. The face was now blackened and glowing with embers, but the screaming mouth seemed to be moving, the hiss emanating from the burning wood itself. They threw a bucket of water on the fire, plunging the cabin into darkness and steam. The next morning, they decided to leave early. As Sarah was carrying her bag to the car, she glanced at the woodpile. The log with the face was gone. And then she looked at the cabin's outer wall, right below her bedroom window. The log was there, leaned up against the siding as if it had been placed there. The screaming face was now pointed directly at her window, and fresh, sticky sap, like black tears, was dripping from its wooden eyes. Leo was an experienced hunter. He'd chosen this cabin in the Appalachian Mountains specifically for its isolation and the promise of a big buck. The cabin was old, Spartan, with no electricity or running water. Just a pump out back and an old oil lamp for light. His first day of hunting was unsuccessful. As dusk fell, he noticed a small, dilapidated hunting blind about 100 yards from the cabin porch. It was a rickety wooden box on stilts, nestled in a cluster of trees. He made a mental note to check it out in the morning. That night, he was woken by the sound of an animal. It was a low, guttural growl, followed by a frantic scrabbling sound. It was coming from outside. He grabbed his rifle and shone his flashlight through the window. The beam swept across the trees and landed on the hunting blind. The growling was coming from inside it. He saw the blind shaking slightly. Something big was in there. A bear, maybe. He decided to wait it out until morning. At first light, the sounds had stopped. Rifle raised, Leo cautiously approached the blind. The wooden ladder was splintered, as if climbed by something with sharp claws. He slowly pushed the door open. The blind was empty, except for the smell. It was a foul, metallic smell he knew all too well. The smell of blood. And on the floor, written in what looked like dried, brown mud, was a perfect, child-sized handprint. He backed away, his heart pounding. He spent the rest of the day on high alert, but nothing happened. That second night, the growling returned. But this time, it was closer. Right outside his cabin door. He heard the scrabbling on his own porch. He saw a shadow block the moonlight under the door. He sat with his back against the door, rifle pointed, until sunrise. When the sun was fully up, he opened the door, ready to flee. The porch was empty. He let out a shaky breath of relief and turned to go back inside to pack. And that's when he saw it. On the interior wall of the cabin, right next to the doorframe, was another small, muddy handprint. It had been made from the inside. For Jake, the old family cabin in the Michigan woods was a digital detox paradise. No phone signal, no internet. Just an old battery-powered radio for emergencies. His first 2 days were peaceful. On the third night, a storm rolled in. Thunder boomed, and rain lashed against the windows. He turned on the radio, scanning through the static for a weather report. Instead, he found a clear, professional-sounding voice. Be advised, subject is believed to be armed and dangerous. Last seen near the Black Pine Creek area. Approach with extreme caution. It sounded like a police dispatch. Black Pine Creek was the name of the stream that ran behind his cabin. A coincidence, he thought. He kept listening. The dispatcher continued. Description: white male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a red flannel shirt and blue jeans. Jake's blood ran cold. He was wearing a red flannel shirt and blue jeans. He switched the radio off. It had to be a prank, a weird local broadcast. But an hour later, his curiosity got the better of him. He turned the radio back on. The voice was still there, but it was different now. More frantic. All units, we have a visual on the cabin. Suspect is inside. Confirmed, he is armed. Jake wasn't armed. He had no weapons. He ran to the window and peered out into the stormy darkness. He couldn't see anything. He turned the radio volume down to a whisper. The dispatcher's voice was now a harsh, broken whisper itself, as if speaking right into the microphone. He's listening to us. He's at the window. Do not let him see you. We're coming inside. Jake threw the radio against the wall, breaking it into pieces. The cabin was silent except for the storm. And then, a new sound started. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the roof. Tap, tap, tap. It was in perfect, mocking imitation of the Morse code for SOS. Emma's story is the most recent, and the most strange. She was a photographer, seeking solitude to work on her portfolio. She found a cabin online, advertised as being in a secluded clearing in the Pacific Northwest. The photos showed a charming, modern little cabin surrounded by a perfect circle of manicured grass, with a wall of impenetrably dense forest surrounding it. When she arrived, the clearing was even more pronounced than in the pictures. It was as if the trees had taken a perfect step back from the cabin. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects. Nothing. The first day was fine. But that night, she felt an overwhelming sense of being observed. She closed all the blinds, but the feeling persisted. She woke up in the middle of the night to a sound like rustling leaves. She looked out the bedroom window and saw something that made her stomach drop. The wall of trees, it seemed closer. She told herself it was a trick of the moonlight. The next morning, she measured it. She took 10 large paces from her porch to the tree line. She took a photo for reference. That evening, the feeling of dread was unbearable. The rustling sound returned, louder this time, a dry, scraping whisper. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she went outside again. The tree line was definitely closer. She tried to take the same 10 paces. She only made it 7. The forest had moved 5 feet closer overnight. Panicking, she ran inside to pack. She looked at the photo she'd taken the day before. In the image, the trees in the foreground were blurry. But deep between them, in the darkness of the forest, 2 perfectly clear, dark shapes were visible. They were tall, thin, and standing perfectly still. They were watching her take the picture. She threw her things in the car and sped down the dirt road, not looking back. A year later, out of morbid curiosity, she looked up the cabin's listing. It was still there. But the description had changed. It now read, "Charming cabin, perfect for those who don't mind close neighbors. The forest is very friendly here."